So our next speaker is Adi Bates. Hi, she's with us over here right now. She's going to talk about beyond the visual, building a compelling brand. Brand is really important when it comes to fundraising personalization because a lot of times we think about when we're sending out an e-appeal or doing some type of fundraising campaign on a fundraising website. A lot of times it becomes very clunky, where a lot of folks don't think really about how you translate the organization's personality and how you really carry it over to either your donation page or your fundraising website, yeah, or how do you carry it over to social media? Brand is more than just a logo. It's an experience that you deliver to your donors with every single connection that you have. So very excited to hear this next topic over here. Adi is a consultant from Purpose Possible, and she specializes in social media design, writing, strategy, and branding. What's really interesting is that she's really passionate about both storytelling, like a lot of the topics that Candace talked about, as well as some of the previous speakers. But then how do you really translate that into some brand positioning? So I'm really excited to hear about this topic today, since it has a direct correlation with fundraising impact and personalization. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited to present today. Okay, so we can just jump right in. Let me share my screen here. So, thank you, Rob, for the introduction. Like you said, I'm the director of communications for Purpose Possible, and at Purpose Possible, we are an organization that really works with mission-driven organizations and leaders to kind of help with the things that kind of get overwhelming a lot of times for organizations. You all have your mission-driven work. We kind of help to do the rest, and we are a full-service company that does that. So, jumping right in, why are we doing this? Why are we even having this conversation? Why is this branding in general important to your fundraising success? So, it's important because we live in a society that is constantly inundated with information. We are competing as nonprofits against for profit organizations with big budgets, lots of flashy things, selling things. We have to form quality connections. And that's what really sets a good brand apart from one that maybe isn't quite all the way there. Another important thing is that people buy from people, even if you aren't selling anything. As nonprofits, you're not necessarily eliciting a transaction all the time, but you have to create a connection with your audiences. And in order to create a connection, there has to be some humanization and some personalization put into your brand strategy. So, how do we do that? We do that with the visuals, the language, the experience, and then the overall presentation of what we're doing. Visuals, for example, are your logo, your color, your font. That's a lot of times that's where people stop when they think about branding. They're like, we have a logo, okay, we're good to go. But how you use that logo, the colors that are associated with your brand, are there very specific colors? If you have a range of them, how are they used? Are there primary colors and secondary colors and something that's only used for an accent? If you have an accent color, it should not be your primary color. Things like that that show up on like your social feeds and your website, that creates familiarity in your brand. It creates recognition for your brand. And that's one of the ways that you can keep your branding tight and it keeps it recognizable and you create connection to your audience. Fonts are a big one. Organizations very often may have a brand kit or a style guide that has some particular fonts, but when they put together a document or they put together social graphics or things like that, they're using whatever font looks cool in the moment versus what is aligned with their brand. The language you use, this is probably one of the biggest things that is important and that I see a lot of. The language are the words that you use to describe your organization. What is the statement? Does your entire organization know what that statement is? A lot of times, the executive director might describe the organization one way, the programming manager will say something else, a board member will say something else. Making sure you have statements that align with your brand and your organization and that is the same and used uniform across your organization by everyone in all capacities. Experience, that is another big one that people forget about. There are big brands like Southwest and Chick-fil-A. Those are really good examples of brands that put the experience as a part of the brand strategy and how they position themselves. As a nonprofit, it's just as important for your audience and the people who are engaging with you to have a good experience that is reflective of the organization. And that, again, should happen on all levels. And then how you put all of these things together is the presentation of that brand. Because you can have strong visuals, you could potentially put the language in and the experience, but if all those things aren't cohesive and aren't working together, then you have a very disjointed presentation of your brand. All of these things, using them together, creates connection, it creates experience, and it creates loyalty. And at the end of the day, what you really are trying to get as nonprofits is some sort of an investment. Whether it is the people you're serving, or the communities you're serving are invested in your organization and they trust you. It could be a donor that is making a financial investment, whether that be a corporation or an individual. It could be a volunteer that's investing their time. All of these elements work together to move your organization forward in the most impactful way possible. All right, let's drill down a little bit. So as I said, the visuals, logo, color, typography. How are you putting these things together? What is the style of your organization? When you start doing this, think about what's the personality? Who are you as an organization? Is the organization something that's youth serving? Is it professional? Are you more of a B2B nonprofit? All of those things kind of blend together in this brand strategy. So having your logo, exactly what are my logo uses going to be? Do I have variations of it? Are these logos accessible to everyone in the organization? Same thing with colors. Does everyone in my organization know our color strategy? Do we have guidelines put together? Are there sets of uniformity? Are there templates? Things like that. Putting together all of these things for your organization and making sure everyone has them. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone that works there, all of your board members, and anyone else that would ever have to create anything visual for your organization, so that they know. Because again, building a compelling brand means your entire organization has to be invested and understand what all the elements of this brand are. Drilling down into language again. So the words that you use to describe an organization. My recommendations to do this: decide who you're going to be as you're talking about the brand. Are you a fun, exciting, child-serving organization that's using simple, fun, short, and sweet words? Are you more academic? Are you more professional, where we're being a little bit more like corporate voice? All of those things differ. As you create that brand voice and tone and decide who you are, create statements that say what your organization is, short and long form. So short would mean, how do you say the organization, who you are and what you do in one sentence? How would you do it in 100 characters? How would you say it in 500 characters? Also, sometimes establishing a strong brand means saying who you are and who you're not. A lot of times organizations really try to push, we do this, we do that, but in all of that information, things kind of sometimes get lost. There's a lot of misunderstanding that can happen. And so to clear up that misunderstanding, you might have to say, we are not an organization that does this. We do this instead. And so, for example, one of my clients is a youth serving organization, and they use sports-based youth development to help foster children through different phases of their life. And so a lot of times what they were dealing with was this misunderstanding of who they were, and people thought they were an after school organization. There were some groups who thought they were tutors, others thought it was just a sports club where kids just came after school and they played baseball and then they went on. At the beginning of the year, we did a campaign on social, and then they used the same information later in some of their presentations to say, we are not just an after school program, we are a sports-based youth development, and we do things in this way. I've put together brand guidelines for organizations that literally say, we do not use this word when we're talking about who we serve. Same organization, they do not use the words those children or the children. They say our youth. They're very, very specific in that. And everyone in the organization knows that they don't say this in this way, we say it in that way. So having that brand voice that consistent copy, the text that you're going to use to reference your organization, making sure everyone knows it, everyone can access it. Also, making sure it is clear on every single platform that you use. A lot of times I see Facebook, LinkedIn, website, and all of those will have different statements about the organization, who you are, and what you do. Making sure those are consistent across all platforms and in the language that your staff and your team uses is critical for having a strong, compelling brand, because you don't want anybody to meet you in person, get that elevator pitch, go to your website and say, wait a minute, is this the same thing that I was talking about? And then search your Facebook page and then be completely confused. Now there's no trust, and it's going to be harder, or it's going to take a little bit more effort to create that investment and that trust. The next step is the experience. So, what type of personality and what type of experience do you want people to have when they interact with your organization? Even in today's society, where we have a lot of things that are virtual and we have things that are in person, there's still an experience, there's still a standard, there's still something that everyone that we engage with comes away with. Experience is also important to remember because, again, people buy from people. So even if you're a fundraiser and you're applying for a grant, there is a person behind that organization that's reading your emails, that's communicating with you, that met with you. You might have a site visit. Those are people that are coming to your organization, that are experiencing your organization and making decisions based on who you are, on whether or not you're going to get that funding. Even if it's an individual, they're still experiencing you in some way. What experience do you want the people and your audiences to come away with? Again, also the audience you serve could be different from the audience that's funding you. They still have experiences that are important. So what are those standards that you need to put in place for the experience of your organization? If the executive director is like, we're going to be really fun and we're going to be personable and we're going to have a really welcoming, warm experience, but let's say their assistant or the receptionist doesn't know that, it changes that experience that someone could have when they make contact for the first time or when they're doing things within your organization. So that standard is important. Again, going back to brands like Southwest and Chick-fil-A, they really put experience high on the list of their brand standards. Every time you get on a Southwest flight, every time you go to a Chick-fil-A restaurant, you're going to have a similar experience, regardless of who you're engaging with, because the experience has been put at a very, very high level of their brand standards. So again, we need to put together a personality. Who are we going to be? What do we want people to walk away with? What are our policies for the experience of our organization? And even in a for a virtual organization where you're primarily doing things over Zoom or you're not really meeting in person, you can put in place policies, things like we're going to respond to emails within 24 hours. All of our email signatures are going to be the same, or we're going to allow maybe a tagline that says something fun. The experience of your newsletter or your social media content, is it engaging? Is it welcoming? What kind of colors and text? Again, that's bringing in all the different parts of that brand experience, because again, people are engaging with you regardless of how you're trying to raise funds, regardless of what your business and your nonprofit is doing. There is always going to be some sort of experience connection, and that has to be a big priority as you're putting together a brand strategy. And then again, putting everything together, that presentation, that collaboration of all elements of a brand. You need to establish the resources for your whole team. That is a big one that I see a lot of, where the senior staff will put together standards and style guides and say, we're going to do it this way, and we want to make sure we have this information or these standards set, but the lower levels of the organization may not get that information. It doesn't trickle through. or the board doesn't get that information. I went to an event recently and they had a lot of volunteers, but all the volunteers clearly didn't get the same message. So the staff was engaging in one way, the volunteers were engaging in another way. So depending on which line you ended up in, you had a different experience. So all of those things in all levels and the entire team having that information is critical. Regular reviews of these policies and standards is also really, really, really important. And engaging the whole team in that review process, in the implementation of those. We do at Purpose Possible, we do branding guides and communications plans for organizations all the time. And we always tell them, make sure you're coming back to this on a regular basis. We're going to give this to you. We can help you if we're retained for ongoing services, but this is something that should be reviewed and included in your quarterly staff meetings. Reviewing your statements about who you are, what you do. Does everybody understand it? Does everybody agree with it? Say it out loud at some quarterly. Let's read our statements out loud so that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about and why we're saying these things, who we are, what we do. Making sure everyone understands this is our color palette, this is what we use. Enforcing those standards in an ongoing way so that everybody incorporates them in all aspects. And then collaborative input. What does the receptionist think the organization does? What does the board member feel like you do? And how would they communicate that? Putting together these things in a collaborative way is really, really important and really valuable for creating that brand. And then in the end, your winning brand strategy is going to be clear. Who you are, what you do. It's going to be clearly stated. It's going to be present across all platforms. You're going to have content that connects to your audiences. The previous presentation was talking about building those connections and winning over with those heartstrings, those really great moments, because again, people buy from people. Even if you're not selling anything, you're still creating some sort of a connection, and that has to be consistent and it has to build trust. Your brand always has to be cohesive. You can't present yourself with a bright neon red logo on one platform and then black and white on another platform. Making sure that who you are visually with the logo, color, typography, who you are as you are written, the language that you're using, all the words that are put out there are cohesive, the personality, the experience, cohesive and consistent. You can't change your description of who you are for every single, if you're, let's say, one grant application can't say we do this and another grant application say we do something else. Being consistent about who you are, what you do in all aspects. And then making sure who you are is compelling and it's reaching the audiences that you serve. So again, remembering personality. Who are you? Does the personality that you put together, does that actually resonate with the audiences that you're trying to serve? All of those things together really will create a winning brand strategy as you are putting yourselves out there as nonprofits, as organizations. And those winning brand strategies will help you to win over the people behind the organizations that you're using to further your organizations. I know that was a lot of information in kind of a short amount of time. Are there any questions that I can answer?
If you do have questions, feel free to put it into the chat box or the Q&A, and then those will be processed in order they are received. But I thought one of the interesting things is around branding. When we did a cost-wise giving study, where we polled a couple hundred donors for insights into how donor experiences and donor insights are trending. But one of the interesting things that we saw was that over 76% of donors said they would donate more to a branded campaign site or a donation page. So I'm kind of curious from your insight, do you see that as surprising, or is that something that is expected when it comes to implementing branding into fundraising?
Oh, absolutely. It should be, it's expected. I'm not surprised by that statistic at all because again, it's that we're creating trust within an organization. So let's say you put out an ask in an email and then you click the link saying, okay, I'm interested in donating. But if you land on a page that does not look like the email that you receive and that does not necessarily resonate in the same way, it creates a little bit of disconnect. You might say, okay, I think this is the right place, so I'll give a little bit. But if you have a strong brand presence, a strong strategy, your wording, the visuals, if everything's cohesive and it's like, yes, this is absolutely the same thing that I saw before. When I go to this social page, there is a personal connection, there's a humanizing element there that will most definitely increase the willingness to give at a higher rate.
Awesome. Thank you for that. One of the questions that we're getting is, are there ever reasons to be less formal in your branding to make it less sterile? Is what is Dacia is asking. Or I guess the better, maybe an extension of the question is, how do you choose what kind of feel to really convey in the branding that you present?
That's a good question. Okay, I was definitely wondering what sterile meant, less sterile. Um, so there are a lot of strategies for establishing kind of that brand presence and that personality. One way I would say do it is think about who you're serving, who's the audience that you're trying to reach, and what would be the best way to communicate with them. So, a youth serving organization needs to be a little bit more personable. It needs to be welcoming. It needs to be warm. If you are, let's say, I work with an organization that's more of a B2B nonprofit, they're kind of behind the scenes. So, and they act as a connector between multiple organizations. They have to be more informative. They have to be more compelling. They have to share facts. So, although they're not necessarily academic, they are still more corporate is the word that's coming to mind, but I feel like that's not quite right. But at the same time, they're not going to be as outgoing and as cheery and as fun. I have another organization that they work with. It's more of like an Atlanta-based community organization, so they're a little bit more casual, more laid back, more fun, and so they position themselves in ways that connect with the primary audience that they're serving. So
Awesome.
does that answer that question? If there's a follow up, I'm happy to help.
There is a follow-up question. It's a long question, so I'm not sure if you're able to read the chat, but I'll be happy to
See it.
summarize it.
Okay, if we have a storyteller on staff who posts on social media in a way that isn't particularly on brand, but people are used to her voice and respond to it, it can't be duplicated and isn't genuine coming from anyone else. That is a tricky one. So I think if it's resonating with the audience, I think that there needs to be a conversation about how to incorporate that personality into the rest of your organization. Because as great as that storyteller may be, what if that storyteller isn't there anymore? Your brand should not drop because somebody leaves. Your brand should not change. You should not feel like there's been a shift in personality across the board. It should be even. So thinking of what are the things that she's doing that are really creating that compelling connection, and how can we incorporate it into our brand strategy across the board. And then if there are things that are really great but maybe not necessarily useful for the rest of the organization, how can we work with her to maybe say, we're going to tone down this part, but we love these things. This is how we're going to incorporate this into the rest of our brand. And then we want to kind of limit some other things in other ways. That was a really good question, though.
Amazing. And looks like maybe we have time for one more question here. So in the Q&A, Idani is asking, any tips on keeping the same brand when our audiences are different? For example, different channels like social media have different age groups. Facebook, their audiences, I would say more Gen X, and then on Instagram is Gen Z. How do you speak to that?
Sure. So again, remember your personality still stays the same. And so the example I use, this may be weird. The example I use is who you are as an individual, as a person is the same, but how you talk to a 5-year-old versus how you talk to your mom may be a little bit different, but you're still yourself. You're still you. So how can you there are maybe some slight words, there may be a little bit more explanation, but when we're talking about your overall brand strategy, your phrasing might be slightly different across platforms, but your color palettes, your logos, how you show up, how the experience that they have should still be the same. That's that full brand strategy that is more than just social platforms.
Thank you so much. It looks like we're at time. So where can folks find out more information about branding, about you? I'd love to
So if
hear.
you have any questions, or if anyone wants to do a brand strategy or do like a 15-minute kind of brand Q&A, I'm happy to help. Please send me an email. There's my email on the screen. If you'd like to learn more about Purpose Possible, our website is there. We offer communications, fundraising, organizational development, and strategic philanthropy services across the country. So if anyone has questions about any of that work or anything about communications, please by all means contact us, or let me know if you have questions.